Well, I don't know much about myself other than the fact that,
When were you born and where were you
well,
born?
I was born in January of
Third.
1933, and that was at Ford Hospital in Detroit.
Oh, really?
You know,
When did your parents move to
Well, we moved to Utica.
Utica?
Well, not really. We moved to John R. in Auburn, was about halfway between uh, Rochester and Utica,
Okay.
and it was 15-acre, primarily farm that my uncle owned,
Ah.
and there was a gas station in the corner where my dad handled that for some time, and we used to pick various fruits and vegetables. And then we eventually moved to Utica, I think when I was in first grade. Didn't have kindergarten. Well, actually, when we were in that area, John R. and Auburn, we did have a stand to sell various, I
Fruits
think
and vegetables.
mostly fruits, but I can't remember exactly. But I remember strawberries were 25 cents a quart, and somewhere along the line I started charging 26 cents because I tell the customers that it's the tax. And you know, and then when my mother found out that I was charging this, she obviously got upset. So I had to go back to the 25 cents. We weren't at a true farm, but at the same time we had a lot of these fruits and some vegetables. I can't remember what they were. But yeah, things have changed dramatically, since that time. Very few people now have their own little semi-farm.
Right.
Now it's much more organized and involves a lot of land, a lot of vegetables and so forth.
Well, when did you move from there to Detroit?
Well, from Detroit, we moved from there to Utica.
Oh.
And then my sister, 6 years older than me, they wanted us to go to a Catholic school, high school, and there was no Catholic high school in Utica.
Mm.
And so she would drive, not herself drive, but they would take a car from Utica to Detroit, which is about, 10 miles or so, maybe more, every day for school. And my parents finally decided that they weren't going to have me do the same thing.
Mm.
So I think the main reason we moved to Detroit was to be able to go to school without having to drive those distances every day. Well, anyway, when we moved to Detroit, I was planning to go to University of Detroit High School. Yeah, but it turned out that the house that we bought, I assume, was within walking distance of Catholic Central High School at that time. And that was at Belmont and Woodward or something, I can't remember. Anyway, so that's where I went to high school, and
Was it true that you got almost kicked out of school when you were in grade school?
Not really kicked out, but
Almost kicked out.
well, it was my sophomore year, and there were 5 courses: English, religion, I forget, the geometry was one, Latin, and history. And I used to be able to make noises that, without people knowing I'm doing it, kind of like I don't know what to call it, ventriloquist or something. And so anyway, in the middle of my sophomore year, I got 2 A's English and religion, 2 Ds, geometry and Latin, and 1 E, which wasn't for effort, in history.
An E in history.
When my mother saw those grades, I suddenly ended up in the, well, a little background. If you didn't get sufficient grades to graduate, you couldn't even show up. They wouldn't even let you show up for the graduation.
Huh.
So anyway, remember, there was the principal at the time was a priest by the name of Father Sheehy, and he was a big, tall guy. And the principal's office at the school was about 1/4 the size of this room, which isn't very big, obviously. And she, discussing it with the priest, my mother indicated that, well, if he's not going to potentially graduate, I'm going to take him and put him in this public school, basically about 6 blocks from that school and about 10 blocks from our home. And I thought, oh my God, I can't. If I have to go to that school, I may not even be able to stay alive, because it was really a rough neighborhood at the time. And so somehow I ended up getting all A's the next semester, but I didn't like Latin, and so for junior year I was able to take French, which was the first time they taught French. And my mother would grill me every night, and then I got the French medal, actually.
Oh, wow.
So you did well with French.
Yeah, I did well in French. I got all A's my junior, senior year.
That's great.
So.
Well, I thought there was an episode in grade school, like 2nd grade or something like that.
Oh, yeah, well, that's true. I did get kicked out of school in 2nd grade. I forgot about that. But it was some kind of a task that we had to write. And the nun that taught 2nd grade was a very nice person. But I guess it was a little bit of a smart ass, if you want to call it.
No.
And there was this girl named Ethel Mottachet. I remember her well.
Wow.
And so somehow, whether I don't know if she didn't write the paper or what, but anyway, I think I said I took the paper, which I didn't have anything but to do. Anyway, the principal at the time was Sister Marie Patrick, and she got word of this, and she made me go through every wastebasket in all 8 rooms and to look for this paper. And then I couldn't find it, obviously, so she kicked me out of 2nd grade. And then the priest that ran it, Father de Kaiser, who was basically the parish priest, he got word of this, and my sister was the smartest kid in the 8th grade. Thank God she was still there. And anyway, my mother said, well, if he goes, she goes. And that's when he came into play on the situation. And somehow I got back in because they didn't want to get rid of my sister being the best student in the 8th grade. An interesting thing, when these are the Dominican sisters, and the high school that my sister went to in Detroit was Dominican High School. And so I don't know if my dad came or not, but when my mother and I went to her graduation, Sister Marie Patrick happened to be there, and she was she had been dismissed by Father de Kaiser because of this episode with my sister. She was something else. Anyway, she saw me and went up to my mother and said, "You'll regret the day he was born." And so you can tell she hadn't got cured of her attitudes.
So you said one of the priests was Father Sheehy?
Sheehy.
Sheehy?
There was a Father Sheedy and a Father Sheehy. Father Sheehy was the principal.
So were there a lot? That was an Irish name, right? So were there a lot of Irish? Are you Irish?
half Irish.
Tell me a little about your background. So that you know. So you're half Irish. What else?
Half German.
The better part of him. It's true.
My mother was the German one, let me
I
tell
know.
you. So, but, you know, I don't know how my mom and dad met. She was from Cleveland, he was from Detroit. He was a seaman on the Great Lakes for a lot of, most of the years I knew. And then he worked in factories in Detroit when he had some injuries or something, and I can't remember, but he worked in the factories. And he did say to me, I'd rather see you gone, dead, or whatever, than to have to work in a factory. Even though I eventually worked in a factory as a physician. Yeah, I can't remember exactly when that was. So, and I eventually worked on the boats after my uncle decided to not send me to. He warned me in the middle of my sophomore year that he couldn't afford to send me anymore, which I think wasn't true. It was just I still hadn't really grown up. You know, I wanted to play baseball summer long, and so in the middle of the sophomore year, and then I had to make a decision since he wasn't going to send me anymore, whether I continue with that or not, and that's how I was able to get jobs on the Great Lakes, and started out with different jobs. One of them, unions had a big control at the time, and the only way you can really get on a boat quickly was to join the union. So I'm a retired member of the National Maritime Union. But
how did you like the boats? It's working.
Well, it was good because first of all, you get all your food and your place to sleep, obviously, and it paid pretty well. So between the fact that you didn't have to buy food and do all that sort of thing, I was able to save a fair amount of money and able to afford to get back to Notre Dame on my own. And that's another story too.
Well, why don't we get into that story? How did you even figure out you were going to go to college? Something you were in a play in high school.
I was when I finished high school. It was I had good grades, and so then my uncle offered to send me. The only thing was that by the time I was able, you started the school year right after Labor Day at those days, and by the time another part of the story is that because of those grades I had in sophomore year, the question came up is, will I be able to achieve anything? And he didn't want to embarrass himself by recommending somebody that wasn't going to finish. But by the time all this came about, basically Notre Dame was full, and but I was like.
Should I get it, or does it answer? I can answer it.
I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
Hello?
Hi, Dad. How are you? It's Mary Ann.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Good, good. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm hanging in. I'm in the middle of being recorded by Keith.
Oh, you are? Okay, well, let me call you later then. I'm sorry. I'll
Okay.
just check in later.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt the recording.
Okay.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.
Yeah.
Okay, in my senior year, I ended up getting picked by Father Clemens to be in a play, which was not a musical. They've always had musical, but they didn't have any singers at the time. So I don't know why he picked me, but the play was Mr. Roberts. And back in those days, you couldn't put a play out with the original name until it was authorized by whoever does that sort of stuff. So anyway, they put it under the name of I, My Eye. And the part that I was selected for was the basically the best part. It was Ensign Pulver, and so it was a very popular play. They put it on 4 nights. I think it was 4 nights or 8 nights. I'm forgetting which now. Imagine a high school plays me on that often. And then it got so popular that they ended up went to Mercy College or something and put it on again.
Huh.
And then they were asked to go somewhere else, and then they got a little scared about running into trouble from the point of view of putting on a play that was still active otherwise. So anyway, because I got a lot of publicity because of my role, and it got in the newspapers, and that's where my uncle discovered it. And so I think it was July when he, the following July, when he contacted me or my parents and wanted me to meet him at his office. My uncle his name is Thomas, and his oldest son was named Thomas. So I go to this ball bearing company. He was the owner of the Detroit Ball Bearing Company. So I go there, and the secretary asked me who you're here to see, and I said Mr. Moore, and she said which Mr. Moore, and I said Mr. Thomas Moore, and she said which Mr. Thomas Moore, and I said Mr. Thomas B. Moore, and she said who should I say is calling? I said Thomas Moore, and she said I know who you want to see. But anyway, that's where I got the interview, and then he offered to send me to Notre Dame at that time.
That's kind of like a comedy bit, isn't it?
Huh?
The 3
Thomas
Thomas
More,
Moores,
yeah.
that's kind of like a comedy bit, isn't it?
I know, exactly. So another interesting thing was, we had our high school was very, very good in baseball. I mean, every kid, decent ball player kid in 8th grade wanted to go to Catholic Central High School because at that time, almost every, there would maybe 1 out of 100 college players got drafted, or whereas most all the players came right out of high school.
Huh.
And so anyway, we had a very good team. We were in the national tournaments in Dayton, Ohio that summer, and I can remember taking the train down to Dayton, and the guy next to me was a player you could pick up 2 pitchers and 1 catcher or something like that. And anyway, he got talking, and I mentioned about I'm going to Notre Dame, and he was a very good pitcher, and he said, oh man, isn't that great, And I said, yeah, well look at you, you're going to really get. I was so impressed with baseball that college is a little different thing. But anyway, it's sad that he did get taken by, I forget what it was, the Cincinnati Reds or something, and then he threw out his arm in the very first year. So I guess I was the lucky one after all.
Really?
How good were you as a baseball player? I mean, looking back.
Well, I was fairly good. One of the things I was a very good hitter, but at the same time I was getting nearsighted and I didn't know it. And I played outfield and catcher, more often catcher than outfield. And there were times when I couldn't pick up the ball quick enough, and these guys could really throw that ball. So I think the nearsightedness, and I don't know when I got my glasses, but it wasn't at that time, was a factor in me not being as good as I wanted to be, or possibly. But turns out that probably was a good thing anyway.
So what did you study at Notre Dame?
Well, I started out, because I applied so late, and I had to live off campus the first semester. There was opening in the College of Commerce, and so I started out in accounting. And then I realized that I really didn't want to be an accountant. And so I eventually went to the College of Arts and Letters and started out in political science. And then I know my dad wanted me to be a lawyer, and realized that you could do a combination of undergraduate courses and start your law school in the fourth year of college, and it would still be 3 years. But anyway, instead of having to spend 7 years altogether, you only had to spend 6. So anyway, that's I don't know why I switched over to the law school at that point in time. But anyway, I was first chairman of I was the chairman of the first Arts and Letters Ball at Notre Dame. And a little side item is that it was my 4th year of college. I moved off campus and lived with Larry Dolan, who was from Cleveland.
What does he own?
He owns the Cleveland Indians. So, but he obviously was in law school, and he finished law school. And but he was. I started an inter-hall baseball team. Again, baseball came back into play. And I saw the guys on the varsity. I tried out for the varsity. I was one of the last cuts, but I saw some of the players were just horrible. And part of that was because some of those guys were recommended by people who contributed to Notre Dame.
Oh.
And so anyway, then we started inter-hall baseball, I think when I was a sophomore. And I put together a team. Larry was my catcher. And we really had some good players. And so we won the championship, and I went to the coach, the base varsity, and I said, can we play a game against you? And they would not even consider it. So anyway, some satisfaction, the fact that they wouldn't consider it, but
when did you become interested in pre-med? I mean, how
well, that was kind of an accidental thing. I had a job as in the dining hall at Notre Dame, and that's another story too. The dining hall people were not part of Notre Dame. They were contracted with Notre Dame. And Ziggy Zarobsky was the guy that kind of was in charge of everything. And pretty soon when you were in the dining hall, you learned that they were marking down kids that supposedly went there for breakfast or lunch or whatever the case may be, but didn't really go. So they were cheating. And if you found out about it, and they knew you found out about it, they got rid of you.
I didn't know that.
All of a sudden, the excuse was you do these dishes coming down on some kind of a line, and if you didn't do it exactly the way they wanted to do it, you might have a dish that crashed. I never had that happen to me, but they made up an excuse to get rid of me. So now I'm on my own again, and no source of income. So anyway, I finally was, I don't know how that came about, that I was able to get an orderly's job at St. Joseph's Hospital in South Bend, where I eventually interned. And that's where I got my interest in medicine. And back in those days, doctors were super enthusiastic about medicine. You know, you had a lot of independence back then compared to nothing now. And so anyway, that's where I got my interest, but I had no pre-med. And so this is now while I'm in law school, the first semester of the 4th year. And at that time, I went to the dean and indicated that I can't afford to stay here anymore. And then I'm looking at another law school where I can do, possibly afford it. But, so I was taking, I forget all the courses, but I knew there were certain courses that would have to be repeated at another school. And so I asked them if I could drop those, and then I could finish my second semester in political science and get my degree. And he let me do that, which turned out to be a good thing, because this was the first year of this dean of the law school, and he set up the final exams like they do for the bar exams, which they don't mark the courses. Your four exams, different courses, and you have to figure out. And then torts and one other course is very, very similar. And so if there are four exams, four different courses, 25% for each course. And as a result of these crazy stuff, they flunked 20 freshmen, 12 juniors, and 6 seniors.
Oh.
And so I think I would have not made it, because I wasn't that interested anymore. But anyway, that was the reason. And then I just so I finished up in political science, but I was so interested in medicine, I decided to look into it. So I had I think math was the only thing I had. And then so I took a double day and night summer session at Loyola in Chicago for certain courses. And then I was planning to go to the University of Michigan, but because Loyola had these courses running so late, when I got to Michigan, I couldn't get into the embryology class, and they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Somebody will drop out in the next 2 or 3 days." And nobody dropped out, so I ran back to Loyola and took some courses, but not the amount that I wanted to. And so anyway, I got accepted at Wayne based on just that. I think it was organic chemistry and something else. Based on that and my grades in college, I got accepted for medical school for the following year.
And where was that?
At Wayne.
So at Wayne University in Detroit, you were...
Yeah, Wayne University College of Medicine, right. And so they accepted me first, and I was hoping to go to Loyola, but I couldn't afford not to take if you turn it down, you're not going to get it again. Mm-hmm. So fortunately I decided to go to Wayne, but I had to take 36 hours of pre-med in one semester in school. That much. It was 5 or 6 different courses, and so
I want to pursue your medical career a little more, but I have one question I wanted to ask before we went on, and that was, you mentioned your sister 2 or 3 times. Is your sister, is she still around?
Yeah, she's 96 now, and she lives in an assisted living facility in the Atlanta area, and she's sharp. We talk every week or every other week, and she has 2 children. They both live in the same area. Where her son is an orthopedic surgeon, and her daughter unfortunately has multiple sclerosis. Mine's fine, but the body's bad.
So I wanted to hear about, you say her son was a doctor, became a doctor?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's your sister must have had kind of a major impression on both of you.
Well, I don't know. My sister really had nothing to do with my decision on medicine, but yeah. So he actually went to medical school in Ireland, and he went to Notre Dame. And then he took a orthopedic residency at Cornell in New York, and but he's done well.
Now, what about okay, so you graduated then from medical school at Wayne. Tell us a little about your career after your graduation from Wayne.
My my grades weren't great, and so I was planning to go to an internship at the Air Force Hospital in Hawaii, but I didn't get accepted there. And so I ended up back at St. Joe's Hospital, which had just started internships that year, I think. And they had their own room, had rooms at the hospital where you could live. So that's where I did that, and then I was planning to go. I applied for residencies in anesthesiology at Ford Hospital, I know for sure, and I was still interested in OBGYN. And Ford did accept me for the residency, but then I saw an ad in the, I think it was the AMA Journal. This is now May. You finished June 30th, and they were willing. There was an orthopedic surgeon there in Miami, Arizona. We're talking about, who decided to. He had been there for a few years, and he decided to take a residency in, I think, internal medicine or something, California. So they're looking for a replacement, and they were willing to fly me out to see. This is in May of that year, and so on my own, I thought, well, maybe this might be a good idea, because I wasn't that sure about. The main interest in anesthesiology was there was only a 2-year residency at the time, so it was the shortness of the time more than the interest in the field of anesthesiology. And looking back at it, I'm sure I wouldn't have liked it at all. Anyway, so
you ended up going to Miami,
Arizona, in family practice. And back then, there were 2 or 3 residency programs in family practice. They were all, I think, in California, but you didn't have to do that. And now, whatever you have to do the residencies. So, and I enjoyed it. It was we had, they had a home for us for $32 a month rent, and it was quite enjoyable, I thought. So.
So Ellie, you and Ellie both lived in Miami for how long?
5 years.
5 years. I wanted to ask you how you met Ellie and how that kind of relationship developed.
Well, it was in my sophomore year of Notre Dame. There was someone putting on a New Year's Eve party. I can't remember. And Ellie was the date of one of my high school classmates, Joe Karam was his name. And I had a date, and but for some reason or other, she canceled at the last minute or something. I forget what it was, so I went alone. And so that's how we happened to meet. And so I was interested, so I asked for her phone number. And back in those days, it wasn't all digital. There was her whatever pre-digit was Lincoln, her, and I forget what my home phone number was, but hers was 18591. That's her phone number. And so I kept trying to remember it was 18591. That's Lincoln. Oh no. Mazer, Mutchler, and Katchik. Mazer was the quarterback for Notre Dame, and Jim Mutchler was one of the ends that didn't have tight ends, and that back there was, and the other one was Joe Katchik. So I kept saying Lincoln, Mazer, Mutchler, and later on Ellie told me, she says, "What do you think of a guy that keeps thinking Lincoln, Mustard, and Ketchup all the time?"
It worked.
So that's how it started.
So you started dating then from that point on
I was still,
Notre Dame.
as a chairman of the Arts and Letters Ball, before that at Notre Dame, and I was dating a gal from St. Mary's of the Woods in Terre Haute, Indiana. So she was the pictures in the yearbook and so forth were with her for that ball. And I didn't have any commitment to her. Sure, her father was a dentist in New Jersey. But anyway, Ellie was getting frustrated. So somewhere along the line, she gave me an ultimatum, Not Ellie wouldn't do that, would she?
Oh, yes, she would.
My way or the highway.
She wanted something.
Yeah, so anyway, then I had to make a choice, and so, don't forget at Notre Dame, I wasn't in science at all, but there was a science ball later in the year, and so I took her to the science ball. So I'm the only one I know of that's got pictures in the yearbook with two different dates.
He was a player.
Yeah. So how long? So when did you guys decide to tie the knot? And
Well, she two things came into play. She knew I was Catholic, and her family was Lutheran at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so she decided on her own to see this priest at, I forget where it was where we were married, but I forget the name of the small town or where it was. Anyway, so she was doing this, and I had no idea at all that she was doing it. And then, so I remember, I think we got engaged at one of the football games at Notre Dame, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, I mean, just in terms of...
Real romantic.
That's true. I think that was true, because I think it was probably my senior year. So, anyway.
And then at that point, where were you in your career? So you were just decided to get married, and did you tell her that, were you interested in medicine at that point, or?
Well, I was in law school, I think, when she thought I was going to be a lawyer, so I forget that would be my senior year. And then all of a sudden I decided to take this pre-med, and then she thought I was putting her off. So anyway.
So you lived, the two of you lived in Miami, Arizona then for 5 years while you practiced, and what was your practice there?
I was in family practice that whole time, and then what happened there was when I went there in 1960, they had an assistant surgeon who was the brother-in-law of the chief surgeon, and the assistant surgeon was really a good surgeon. Well, he finally decided to leave and move to Morenci, Arizona, and the guy that replaced him was a terrible surgeon, horrible. And so I just felt like I couldn't, I can't remember what year this was, probably the fourth year I was there or something, but I just realized I just couldn't continue to want to, you had to refer everything to the surgeons there unless it was some kind of a specialty area. So, and you could refer to like a cardiologist in Phoenix, and one of them became very important in my life.
How so?
Huh?
How so?
Well, he was the one that when we moved to Phoenix in July of 1965, and I joined two other family practitioners here at the time, and then by July 31st, I was in St. Joe's Hospital with cocci meningitis, and I spent 2 months there, and I wasn't getting the right treatment, and then I ended up spending 3 more months in Springville, California, in Springville Hospital getting the right treatment. But anyway, when I was when I went to I think the neurologist or something down here, he didn't think there was anything serious, so he didn't follow up. And the cardiologist that I knew well from Miami talked to me, and he says, I'm going to call him up and tell him to do a spinal tap on you. And that's how they discovered it. Because if I hadn't done that, probably the next time would be when they block off block off an area here. I forget, all of a sudden I can't think of the name now. So that's how I got diagnosed, by a cardiologist and not by a neurologist.
But you were in family medicine at that point. How did you get into ophthalmology?
Well, when I was getting my treatment up in California, the drug that they use is what they call fungostatic and not fungicidal. In other words, it can control the disease but not kill it. So, and the chief, there were two physicians involved in treatment, but he said, you ought to think about something else in family practice, because it's kind of stressful compared to some of the other fields. And so also that's when I figured out how to get out of the draft. Yeah. But I was
hang on, I want to hear that story, but I'm going to close this door because I hear too much of her conversation. Okay, now you mentioned something about the draft.
Yeah, well, I was in the hospital in California from September something till basically Christmas Eve, I think. But in October, I got a notification from the Detroit Draft Board that I was 1A for the Vietnam War. But because I had meningitis and prognosis is guarded for sure, then when the doctor wrote back to the draft board and told them that, I didn't hear anything more from them until I turned 35. And they sent me a notification that I'm too old now for, bye-bye. So that's how I got out of the Vietnam War, which would have affected my, I doubt that I would have gone into ophthalmology. But anyway, I was always interested in fine, meticulous surgery. And so I applied for residency when I got back here, and now it's now December, and residency started in July 1. And back in Detroit, I applied for the residency, and they take 5 residents a year. But anyway, the residency was full. So I also applied for psychiatry, partly because I think I saw a lot of patients at times that needed some kind of help, but not necessarily a psychiatrist. But they were willing to pay $6,000 a year for residency. So, but anyway, it was in January that I got a call or a letter from the residency in Detroit saying they now have an opening because one of their residents that they had accepted got drafted for the Vietnam War. So that's how I was able to get. So we had only about 2 or 3 weeks to make up our mind, and so we're, in terms of that, they weren't going to give us any more time than that to decide one way or the other. So so we decided that, and we were able to lease the house for a year to this couple, and then I don't know what, they didn't need it anymore or what, but it was a physician, OBGYN physician, who was moving to Phoenix, and they lived in the house for the following 3 years, and then they moved down to about a block and a half away. And so we ended up getting our house back, which was very convenient since kids are going to school here.
I want to hear about your kids now. I wanted you to tell me how many kids that you have, and a little about, do you remember, like what was going on when they were born? Were you in Miami? Just a little about your family life.
Well, we have 4 kids. The oldest is a daughter who lives now in Glenview, Illinois. And then the next is their son, who lives in Hong Kong. Middle daughter lives in Edmonds, Washington, and then the youngest daughter lives in Piedmont, California. The middle daughter got a law degree from DePaul in the Chicago area, and did real estate law and I forget what else. She retired from that several years ago. And the youngest daughter was in, I don't know what she did really. Oh, she was in the insurance business, and that's where she met her husband. And the oldest daughter worked in projects, various projects that she was in.
Were they all born in Arizona?
No, the oldest two were born in Detroit, and the last two were born in Miami. So my oldest daughter's just turned 65, so, but I know they were born in St. John's Hospital in Detroit. And
So you've had...
they all went to Notre Dame also.
What's that? Oh, they all went to Notre Dame?
Yeah.
That's great. That's quite a family tradition.
Yeah, actually the middle daughter, one lives in she married a classmate from Notre Dame, and their oldest son just recently got engaged to a former Notre Dame classmate, and she's in a general surgery residency now, and they're scheduled to get married in January of 24.
How many grandchildren? Or, how many of them?
9 grandchildren.
9 grandchildren.
Yeah. So the oldest got 3, middle daughter's got 2, and the youngest daughter's got 4.
Wow, that's a sizable family. It's quite a legacy you're leaving.
Yeah. So of the grandchildren, see how many went to Notre Dame. 4. So the oldest daughter, her daughter, and one son went to Notre Dame, and the middle child was a boy, got accepted at Notre Dame, but went to USC instead, and that was really related to economics because they gave him a scholarship, and he finished his bachelor's and master's all in 4 years.
Must be a bright young man.
Electrical engineering, and now he's in a PhD program at Penn University. But he's been in it for a long time. But it's mainly he founded a robotics company, and so he hasn't finished the. Part of it was COVID-19. They couldn't do certain work there. But so he's still in the PhD program. But
I did want to ask you. Just wanted to ask if you could leave any advice for the future.
Well, I don't know about advice. Got to marry the right woman. That's for sure. And I don't know what to say.
You lost your wife just in the last year or two, right?
Yeah, April 29th of 2020. So, but and she was, I should probably show you the letter, or maybe you've already seen it, the letter that Mitch wrote because he couldn't attend to her.
Somebody read it, and I heard it on the memorial.
Yeah. But he wrote a very thoughtful letter about how important she was in terms of, with me being in the hospital for 5 straight months, and the real possibility that I wouldn't get out of there. She was the stable one. We just moved to Phoenix in that month, in July, when I went in. I came down before because a couple of weeks before I was staying in a little apartment. I don't know what the situation was, but anyway, but she was the rock, you know, and the kids recognized that, you know. So, but she, you know, didn't.
So your major advice to the future is make sure you're happy and lined up with the right person that you're going to live your life with.
Yeah, if you're lucky enough, yeah. I know there's no question she was the right person. And I remember somebody else that knew both Ellie and the gal that I dated at St. Mary's of the Woods. He says, "You sure?" She knew them both somehow. He says, "You married the right one." I said, "I know." So, but I don't know. I can't really advise children. The main thing is that, you know, just like my mom did for me, parents have got to be really quite aware of how easy it is for kids not to succeed without some guidance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing. Is that,
And you feel strongly about that?
oh yeah, sure. You know, I mean, I'm sure if my mother hadn't, I mean, she was all about education. She was the only one in the family that didn't go to college, and we're talking back. I mean, she was born in 1891, so you know, not that many people went to college in those days. But she had a brother who was a priest, and a younger sister who became a lawyer, and an older sister was, I think, an English teacher or some type of teacher. And when she had a brother that died, I don't know how old he was, and didn't know much about him at all. But she, you know, without her, you could imagine not taking me to that principal's office, and you know, I could be, my total career could be a sophomore year in high school.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy,
Do you have anything that you feel like you would like to say that you haven't said?
that I haven't done.
That you haven't said? You know, would you like to? Is there anything you'd like to say to whoever watches this? That remember, Grandpa told you.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I would have to say that I'm proud of the children, and I'm proud of thus far the grandchildren. And you know, the only thing I'd say to the grandchildren: remember not to embarrass your parents.
Good information. Did you have anything you wanted to ask, Trudy? Because you were out of the room for a while.
I know.
I covered it.
So I don't know what you talked about while I was gone. No, I think you talked about. I think you talked about everything pretty much.
Well, I mean, you never talk about everything, but I mean,
Well, I'm thinking of
everything
past,
that you can admit
yeah.
to.
I'm thinking of past conversations, dinner conversations,
Right.
where Tom, you know, would talk a little bit about his past and stuff.
Fortunate to, first of all, I was fortunate to be the first pediatric ophthalmologist in Arizona. That gave me an advantage, and having spent 2 years in family practice here before I went back to my residency, I was able to meet pediatricians and others.
Good
And
point.
when we first moved to Phoenix after my residency and fellowship, it was August 31st of 20. I think it's 2071. Yeah. And the office that I had leased wasn't even ready, and for some reason or other they didn't get it prepared. So back in those days, and having had the 7 years of family practice, back in those days they didn't have emergency room physicians. And so they would use family practitioners and others in the emergency room for $10 an hour. And that's why I was able to work emergency rooms in St. Joe's, St. Luke's, Scottsdale Baptist, the other one up north, it's something Lincoln or something.
Where were you working when the riots in Michigan, in Detroit, hit?
Well, we just moved to Detroit, from where?
Miami?
When were the riots?
67.
67.
67.
60.
Yeah, 1967 were the riots.
1967 or 1960?
No, 67.
67.
67. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's when we moved back to Detroit for my residency.
Right.
And it was like the third week we were there, and we were living in Royal Oak. And Ellie kept thinking, why did we come back here? You know? So.
Well, you seem to be, I mean, I realize we can't predict the future or know what's going to happen in the future, but looking at your past, you seem to have been a very, a person in medicine that, you know, both enjoyed and felt responsible for, you know, what you were doing it felt like it was a responsible thing to do for a living. You know, and I'm just curious, what would you recommend, as I say, we can't tell the future, but would you recommend any of your, you know, your following group to ever become interested in medicine?
Well, I can tell you right away that the way medicine is today, I would never, ever recommend it. I mean, it's not that we don't need the physicians, but the cost of going to medical school, plus the control that insurance companies, the government, hospitals have over physicians, it's just, I mean, it's like day and super midnight. So in fact, I can recall that Maureen's oldest son, the one that just got engaged, when he went to Notre Dame, he started out in pre-med. And I told Maureen that, this goes back a ways obviously, I told Maureen if you can avoid it, I would prefer that Grantland not talk to me about medicine, because I can't encourage him to pursue it. And fortunately, his two roommates, their first and second year, were in commerce, and they couldn't understand why he was interested in medicine. So they're the ones that talked him out of it. And then he turns around and gets engaged to a general surgeon.
Somebody,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, you know, we don't know the future. I mean, it could all change. But what I'm saying is, you've had a good life and a good career.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, being the first pediatric ophthalmologist here in Arizona, and then also having already met a number of physicians when I was in family practice, and working in emergency rooms till my practice opens 5 months after January 31st of '72. I had a good opportunity to meet those people, and I had met them, you know, before. And then being the first, prior to my being a first pediatric ophthalmologist, there was only one subspecialist in the pediatric field, and that was a pediatric surgeon. But you know how many pediatric subspecialists there are now. Every field's got a subspecialist.
Highly specialized.
Well, I mean, you know, instead of a pediatric, I mean, you got pediatric radiologists and pediatric this and that, pediatric this and that in the area, and being only the second pediatric subspecialist back in 1971, you know, it was a big opportunity.
Quite an honor, quite an opportunity.
An honor, but
Yeah, well, it must have been.
But you know, and I was lucky to get the fellowship. The reason I got the fellowship, it was no pay fellowship for a whole year, and the reason I got it was there were two physicians who specialized in pediatric ophthalmology. One was the Detroit area, Royal Oak, Dr. Cooper, and the other one is Dr. Parks in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Cooper, he was 64 at the time, and he wanted me to join his practice so he could kind of think about retiring before too long. And I said, well, my wife, you know, keep in mind my wife isn't interested in staying in Detroit, but I was with him for 9 months, and then Dr. Park's program was 3 one-year fellows and 4 3-month fellows in his program. And basically there was like 15 or 20 applicants, and he knew that Dr. Cooper wanted me to join his practice, so that's why I got it. I wasn't any smarter than anybody else. Mm-hmm. But Dr. Parks and we became good friends because he has had a cottage up in Maine and for years and years, and when we were able to go up there for a meeting in 1975, that's when we were able to buy the cottage we have, which isn't too far down the lake from them. So we got to know each other personally as well over the years.
Good friends and
yeah, very good.
Good leadership.
He was super smart.
Yeah.
And he what it amounts to is most of the time you're operating on both eyes. Doing eye muscle surgery, and you would do the first eye and you do the second, and he would assist you. So and he's a great teacher. Some programs like up in Mayo, they used to in Rochester. They used to rotate the residents down here for County Hospital, and usually 3 months at a time. I think something like that. But anyway, you realize when you start working with these guys, they're now in their last year of their program, and they hardly knew how to do any surgery because they didn't get to do it. It was not like he did one eye, I do the next. It was he does both eyes and you watch, and that's that's good.
All right, I'm going to if no one has anything else they'd like to add, we're going to be. I didn't want this to stop mid-sentence, so I'm going to wrap it at this point. Is that okay with you?
Fine. I don't have much to say anyway.
You've done fine. Yeah, you've done fine.
Wait, there's one more thing that I want to talk about, which I think is important. Back when I was in 4th year of college, 1st semester of law school, rooming with Larry Dolan, who bought the Cleveland Indians several years ago, many years ago. And he mentioned that he was sent to Notre Dame by his uncle to play football, and Larry was a good football player in high school, and he was about my size, and his uncle was counting on him to make the team, which was a very good team at the time, and he didn't make it. But at any rate, in our 4th year of college, I roomed with Larry off campus, and he stayed in law school, and I changed my mind and went into medicine. But several years ago, when they were here in town for spring training, he and his wife had met with Ellie and I a number of times under the same circumstances. But Ellie was up with her 4 or 5 annual trip, 4 or 5 girls from high school for their annual trip, one place or another. And Larry and I and his wife went out to dinner. And during the dinner, he mentioned about how important I was in his life, which really surprised me. And it turns out I was the first chairman of his chairman of the first Arts and Letters Ball in the fall of 54 or 53 at that time, and I chose him as my ticket chairman. And in my our sophomore year, I started an inter-hall baseball team, which was the first year they had that. And he was my catcher, and our team won the championship in that. At any rate, at this dinner meeting, he mentioned about how important I was in his life, and I couldn't imagine why. And he mentioned those two situations: the ticket chairman of the ball and the chip catcher on my interhall baseball team. And he almost came to tears to tell me this, how important it was in his life, which I couldn't imagine that would be important. But it tells you that there are situations in your life, maybe in teenage years, even younger than that, and later, where that type of thing can come into play, and you don't realize how much influence you might have on someone's life. And considering that he ended up buying the Cleveland Indians and then continuing to still own them, and I was very surprised, and it made me realize that you can have influences on people's life that you don't even think about. And then if you do have situations where you have that kind of influence, or someone has that kind of influence on you, it's very important to keep that in mind and look forward to doing something in that area for your future and helping people that need that kind of support. Anyway.
Great. Very good.